For Session Update, I'm Shannon Lurkey. Governor Dayton and administrative officials called a press conference to offer comparisons between the legislature's omnibus tax agreement and his own tax priorities. The governor also pushed for emergency school funding to alleviate funding shortfalls that some schools are facing next year. Following the news conference, Senate Majority Leader Paul Gazelka and Speaker of the House Kurt Daudt offered their views on end-of-session negotiations. Here's that event.
An hour ago, I received a letter from Speaker Daudt and Senate Leader Gazelka admonishing me for being, quote, unavailable to meet this morning. I was quite available. I was immersed with my staff and commissioners trying to make sense of what they have done and not done in this legislative session. My chief of staff spent all weekend trying to get basic information on their massive budget bill. She was promised targets and spreadsheets. At noon, we received a one-page list of so-called targets, providing no tails, listing the costs of the 2021 biennium. No spreadsheets detailing their spending, cuts, and policy provisions. Friday, I received a letter from Speaker Daudt claiming the legislature could not consider my emergency school aid proposal because it had not had hearings. Neither have many of their provisions had hearings or been considered in public conference committee sessions. Their entire process has been behind closed doors, withholding information from the public, other legislators, and my administration. So for them to claim that they can't provide the emergency school aid for Minnesota school children is just absurd. There's plenty of money sitting in their tax bill, more than enough to keep teachers in front of school children. There's over $200 million of corporations' overseas profits that the Republicans want to leave untaxed, and other items benefiting people who certainly don't need more tax breaks. Let's give the breaks to our kids and our teachers instead by funding the emergency school aid. My position is that I will not engage in any negotiations on the tax bill or sign any tax bill until we have an agreement to provide emergency school aid. There's time left in this 1 week remaining to work things out on those two measures, on the massive budget bill, the bonding bill, on elder care, if the House will consider the legislation that they've stonewalled, on opioids, if the House will stop protecting the large pharmaceutical companies from paying any part of the cost, on sexual harassment, where the Senate is stonewalling, and on the pension bill, and other matters where we can reach agreement. There's time to work all that out if legislators are willing to compromise and come to agreement that respects my priorities as well as their own. We're not at that point yet. I hope that we will come to that point quickly in the days ahead. Let me ask our commissioners here to detail some more of our objections to their respective measures. Cynthia.
Thank you, Governor. I'm Cynthia Bowerly, the Commissioner of Minnesota Department of Revenue. We received the Republican tax bill Friday evening in the form of a spreadsheet that was released to the conference committee that evening, and we received the text of the bill, about 200 pages, at midnight on Friday. So we are continuing to review the language carefully. However, based on what we know so far, we have serious concerns about the bill. There are concerns both about the priorities reflected in the bill and the long-term costs associated with certain provisions. I'll start with the priorities. The governor's bill, which did not spend any general fund dollars for tax cuts, would help lower and middle income families by expanding the working family credit to larger families, saving 329,000 Minnesotans an average reduction of $160. His bill creates a new personal independent credit, which provides $60 per person and a tax credit on each return for those earning less than $90,000 as a single, or married filers earning less than $180,000, and it phases out at higher incomes. For a family of four, that means $240 in a tax reduction. The Republican bill instead provides a rate cut of 0.1% to the first tier and 0.2% for the second tier, respectively. The challenge with the rates is that many Minnesotans will receive no tax relief as a result. For example, a family of 4 with $30,000 in income will see no benefit from the rate cut. The rate cut will benefit wealthier filers more. The tax reduction for a family of 4 would amount to about $20 for a family earning $20,000 and a $263 tax reduction for a family earning $250,000. A family of 4 earning the median income of $65,000 would receive a $92 tax cut because of the lower rates from the Republican bill, and under the governor's plan, that same family would receive $240 in tax reductions. We also have concerns about the corporate rate cut. Unfortunately, this bill, like the federal tax law passed year, provides more for business than for working families across Minnesota when it comes to that rate reduction. The Republican bill changes the income tax rates for both individuals and corporations, but however, it provides a 0.7 rate cut for corporations. That's 7 times more than those earning in the first tier with a 0.1% rate cut. All of this is on top of the 40% cut that corporations already received in their federal taxes. The proposal also protects corporations from significant corporate tax by shielding multinational corporations with foreign subsidiaries rather than focusing on Minnesota families. Second major area of concern is about fiscal responsibility. The governor's commitment to long-term fiscal responsibility is the reason that he has proposed restoring 3 items from last year's tax bill: the state general levy inflator, the cigarette inflator, and the estate tax freeze at $2.4 million. In contrast, the Republican bill phases in its largest features. Those 2 rate cuts do not show us a full cost until 21. And that means the true cost in a full biennium of 22-23 is $570 million for the rate cuts alone. If tax provisions are important enough to be included in the bill, the full cost should be shown in the first year so that Minnesotans can understand who is benefited and by how much. We look forward to continuing to discussions toward mutually agreed upon targets between the legislature and the governor. At that point, we will begin to look towards an agreement with the Republicans that reflect the governor's priorities in addition to those the Republicans have. And again, the governor's priorities focus on the working family credit, the personal dependent credit, and many others. There are areas of an agreement, particularly with how we respond to the federal tax bill. But we have a great deal more to do if we are to put low and middle income families first in a tax bill that protects family budgets while also preserving the state's fiscal future.
Good afternoon. My name is Myron Franz, Commissioner of Minnesota Management and Budget. What I want to talk about briefly is what do we need to do to finish this last week. We have to, in order to begin serious negotiations, we need to have some detailed information. So I want to talk a little bit about what do we need and what have we provided thus far. So one of the things that the governor mentioned was this one-page so-called target sheet, but it leaves a lot of unanswered questions. We need to know what's left on the bottom line for their budget for this biennium and the next. This target sheet did not have the next biennium in it. We need to know, is their overall budget balanced this biennium and the next? We need to know, where are they spending their dollars? We need to know, what services are they cutting? We need to know, are they raiding any funds in order to make their budgets balance? We need to know who will be impacted by these proposals. Without this information, without a detailed spreadsheet and this information, it's impossible for us to sit down and negotiate in good faith over some of these really incredibly important issues. I just want to reiterate that long ago, on January 16th, the governor presented his bonding proposal in great detail to the legislature, and on March 16th, he presented his supplemental budget bill along with his tax bill. And in his supplemental budget bill and his tax bill, he proposed a balanced budget for this biennium and the next, and the governor's budget proposal with the emergency education funding continues to be balanced for this biennium and the next. And as Commissioner Bowerly said, we must show the true cost of these provisions by showing how much they cost in year 1. So we look forward to having the detail and the information in order to actually do our work. Thank you.
Any questions on this subject?
Governor, is your tax credit ongoing, or is it a one-time credit?
It's ongoing.
So, Governor, where are we at, I guess is the question. Is this looking dismal with 7 days left to pass bills, or are you still optimistic?
If they're willing to compromise, we have time to work things out. We have a breakfast scheduled for tomorrow morning. All 4 leaders, and we'll see. You know, it's kind of like 2011, it feels like at the end of the session where, I took a position, they took a position, I said, well, I'll meet you halfway, and they just stayed stuck right where they were, and we weren't able to conclude matters. If they're going to be totally unyielding on emergency school aid, all they need to do if they want to have hearings is go to one of the 4 schools I visited last week. All they need to do is talk to parents have already heard from their kids about the teachers they're going to have next year, and now are finding out those teachers are going to be laid off. All they need to do is talk to the 3rd grade teacher in Winona, whose class size is going to go from 17 to 29 next year because of their budget cuts. Those are the kind of hearings they should have if they want to really understand the situation that schools and teachers and parents and students are in right now, and that they have something they can do about it next fall. So if they're willing to compromise on that and provide emergency school aid, I'm willing to concede some matters on the tax bill that I think are bad public policy, but I recognize that they need to get some of what they want. On the budget bill, we haven't seen it yet, so I don't know what we're talking about in terms of give and take. And as Commissioner Franz says, it's got to be an honest, balanced budget, along with the tax bill, both for the rest of this biennium, the next one, and looking into the future, so we don't leave Minnesota on the same kind of cliff that they were on before, and which was they fell over when the Great Recession occurred. So yes, it's possible. It all depends on their willingness to compromise, recognize that I have my priorities and they have theirs, and if we're co-equal branches of government, which we are, then we need to both acknowledge the other's priorities.
Assuming they don't go with the school funding you want, are you willing to just not have a tax bill this year?
They won't have a tax bill. I won't sign it. I mean, they can try to override. I won't sign it.
And then the other bills then fall in line with that. If you're not going to have a tax bill, you might not have any of the other bills.
Well, the problem with the budget bill is it's very hard to negotiate about the cost of that without knowing what the cost of the tax bill is going to be. Is it possible? Yes. I mean, we can get a ballpark in terms of parameters. I would like to sign the budget bill if we can get all the policy language out of it, and if we can agree on the spending items. And again, I'm willing to give and take on that. The bonding bill, the same. The pension bill is settled. Basically just needs the Senate to adopt, hopefully, the very small provisions the House added. We'll have that signed. The opioid bill can be signed if they produce it, and if the House will agree with the Senate that the pharmaceutical industry bears some responsibility and should be paying some of the costs of that. The elder care, again, the Senate's basically passed the bill. The House hasn't considered theirs at all. I don't know why they're stonewalling that one. Representative Pepin deserves great credit for the sexual harassment initiative, which passed the House. That's stuck in the Senate. The pension bill should be coming to me as well as those others. School safety should be coming clean, not part of an omnibus bill. I mean, there are things that they can do. We spelled them out before. We got 125 letters that we sent to them detailing our positions, most of which they've ignored. But there's still time. We can settle down, and we'll have a breakfast tomorrow morning. We can go over these details again. But if they're willing to find middle ground, we'll get this done by next Monday. If not, then we won't.
Are you willing to compromise on the total amount of the school aid funding?
Well, the 134 million is 127 million of which is this, 123 million of which is this biennium. That's the minimum amount I'd agree to. The other items that I think are just as important, the special education and the pre-kindergarten, I'm willing to negotiate, and if I have to concede some part of those to get an agreement, I'll consider doing so. But I'm not going to concede on the emergency school aid.
I think it would go along with some amount of emergency school aid, meet your standard. Is the tax bill, are you willing to go along with that as it stands, or if not, what needs to be changed?
No, not as it stands. Well, Commissioner Bowerly detailed some of our objections. The principal one is that they're allowing, we had conformed to the, my provision, conformed to what the federal government did to the offshore corporate profits. We're not going beyond what the federal government, the Trump administration decided to do, treat that money coming back into the country. they're getting enormous tax breaks on all of that to begin with. They get a 40% reduction in the corporate tax federally. They have the business property tax frozen for the next decade. In the last session, they got a corporate business tax rate. I mean, these folks are just falling all over themselves, doing whatever they can to help out the moneyed interests of Minnesota. You add that to protecting the pharmaceutical industry. You add that to protecting the large nursing home corporations. I mean, they're just, everybody who can do them some good in November, they just can't do enough for. And then you got just school kids who want to have a decent education, and they don't have time to consider that. Well, that's just absurd, and I won't stand for it. I won't agree to it. And if they want to ruin the session in the last week with their intransigence, that's their prerogative. But that's what it comes down to. Are they willing to find common ground and acknowledge that I'm entitled to my priorities as they're entitled to theirs? Or are they going to just stonewall it and say, well, it's all our way or no way?
Governor, Republicans would say that there's some intransigence on your part. Just 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, you came up with this emergency school funding very late in the session that originally wasn't part of the equation. How would you respond?
Well, they came up with a tax bill wasn't part of the equation. They came up with a tax bill they did not in conference committee, but behind closed doors, the two leaders, as they've done the budget bill and most of the other things they've been dealing with. The House, I'm not even clear because they haven't told us this $100 million legislator reelection slush fund. They're taking it out of LCCMR. I haven't heard a word from any of them about that. That hasn't gone through any kind of hearings, but I'm told it's in the works. Their bonding bills came out after, I made 3 weeks ago my proposal on emergency school aid. There are a couple other measures, we can get you the details, but there's plenty of things that they, with 3 months of a legislative session, haven't met deadlines or even reasonable timelines. And so, I mean, again, it's so obvious if you go to these schools that I did, and if they have any doubt, they should be going there themselves, listening to, hearing from school administrators and teachers and parents and from the kids themselves that this money is desperately needed by school districts to avoid even more draconian cuts than might occur in some cases, like Minneapolis and St. Paul. To say that we don't have the money when we got over $200 million of tax giveaways for multinational corporations repatriating their profits, the profits. We shouldn't tax their profits. I mean, it's just, they really need to reevaluate their priorities over there if they want to get things done, if they want to be able to go and tell the people of Minnesota straight face that they serve their interests.
Governor, does the state have enough money to do the emergency school funding and tax relief in light of latest revenues?
Is not all the tax relief they want to provide, but certainly enough to provide a good piece of it. And especially as it relates to families, individuals, the rate cuts. If we were to equalize the percent cut, the 0.1% in the first tier and the 0.2% in the second tier, if you equalize the second with the first, make it more equitable. I mean, that's something I don't think is good public policy, but again, I'm willing to consider it if they're going to consider my priorities. And there is enough money to do that, yes.
Governor, do you have any reaction to the Fox 9 report last night?
After we talk about this budget, I'll open up to questions on. Thank you.
Things in the bonding bill that you wanted that the House and Senate do not have, but could I get you to focus on one piece, which is the bus rapid transit money that you asked for Met Council, which is in neither House or Senate budget?
Well, I'm sitting down with my bonding staff right after this meeting and really go through both their bills and mine with a fine-tooth comb, so I'll have a more detailed response on other items. But on that one, I mean, it's just, they want to destroy public transit in the metropolitan area. They don't want to fund light rail. That leaves only bus service, and they don't want to fund that. They don't want to make the capital investments. They don't want to make the operational improvements. I mean, we're going to just throw everybody into cars and pack them even tighter into the freeways. People aren't going to stand for that, and people have other options. They're going to go elsewhere for their employment. It's so senseless. And they're so good at being against things. But when you give them a chance to be for something, to improve people's lives, they just want to walk away from it. And there's a big partisan tinge to what in the bonding bill does for Minneapolis and St. Paul and DFL strongholds. and what it does for others all over the state. Now, I'm for all over the state. Don't get me wrong. My bill provides that too, but there's got to be a balance, and there's got to be some common sense.
The bill's on the floor this afternoon in the House. What are you advising DFL legislators to do about the bill that's on the floor?
I haven't advised them one way or the other. They'll have to make their own decisions on that. You know, it's tough to vote against the bonding bill because it's got projects in there that everybody supports. But $825 million bonding bill, given the bonding capacity of the state, which leaves room for what, 325 million? And then say, okay, so we're going to take 100 million from, if this is true, because again, all I know is what I read and heard reported. They haven't discussed this with me. Take $100 million out of LCCMR and use it to fund, capital investments. Put it in the bonding bill. Make it 925. Do it honest. Do it straightforward. The cost of borrowing is higher if you do it through the LCCMR route. Rather than stealing money from the Stadium Trust Fund to fund veterans homes. I'm for funding veterans homes. Put the money in the bonding bill, as the Senate does. Let's be honest about this stuff. Let's be straightforward. If those are priorities, then put them in where they're supposed to be in, and not where they're hidden, and not where they're going to show up years later and have costs that people haven't anticipated now.
So what would it take for you to sign the bonding bill? What would it have to be on it? How big would it have to be?
Well, I'd like to see a bonding bill. I proposed $1.5 billion. Last year they agreed to $995 million. Again, this, as I understand it, this $100 million coming out of LCCMR is no way of tacking another $100 million onto an $825 million bill. So, why not do it straight up and honestly? So,
what would you? Are you saying you would veto it?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I wanted to get it higher, or I agree to it. But we'll have to see what's possible. I don't want to I'm not going to try to foretell what the outcome will be on Friday or next Sunday.
Governor, if they sent you an $825 million bill, which is what they're headed for, would you sign it?
I'm not going to get into hypotheticals.
And back to the emergency school, I think a lot of the Republicans say they're having a hard time getting their head around how much money the schools have, new money the schools got in the last couple of years, hundreds of millions of dollars, and more per pupil unit. They don't understand why there's a crisis now, all of a sudden.
Well, they should go to these schools, and they should look at the composition of these classes, which are 30 to 60% kids from other countries. The percent of children with English second language needs is double, sometimes triple the state average. School lunch, the number of kids that are in poverty, the number of kids that are homeless, and these are in elementary, first, second, third grades. Those who say that the schools haven't been managing their affairs responsibly should go to talk to their superintendents and their school boards, because it's frankly insulting to those people who have worked so hard and had to make some very difficult decisions about cuts and school closings and the like. And those are people elected by the same people elected the legislators, and not the superintendents, but the school board. And they're doing their darndest. And now they face over 59 of them around the state with some very serious deficits that could be, in most cases, relieved, or at least relieved if not eliminated, by what I'm proposing to do. And there's no moral reason to deny our schools and our school children this money while they're putting $200+ million into the pockets of giant corporations.
Governor, one of the arguments that they make is that there's really no such thing as temporary education funding, that it will become expected in the years to come. You're talking about how their tax cost will balloon. Won't you be essentially making the schools a promise by giving them something now that they will need to keep it balanced for the years to come?
I can't forecast what the situation is going to be economically, in 2 years, 4 years. I can only do what's right with the time that's remaining in my term, 2 terms, and this is what's right to do. There are times during the Great Recession where there was no money for schools. They effectively took money away from them. They borrowed over $2 billion. And legislatures and governors make those decisions under the circumstances which exist at that time, and nobody's bound by what a previous legislature has done. So they're going to have to make those decisions. If they want to eliminate Minnesota Care by eliminating the premium tax, they're going to have to, face the consequences of that decision. They're going to have to face consequences of some very difficult decisions, especially with the revenue bleed that they're insisting upon this time. And if there's a constitutional amendment transferring money to the highway fund, I mean, and we haven't even seen the budget bill and seen what the hidden costs are there. I mean, there's just no fiscal responsibility being demonstrated by the Republican majorities. It's just grab every dollar, grab everything, steal every dollar from every fund. Possible, not steal literally, but take every dollar that's available out there and sell the future of the state short.
Other questions on this topic?
Governor, did you see the Fox 9 report?
Can I just see if there are any other questions? I listen when you guys talk about this. It was the way you haven't had to live through our protocol. But we do questions on the one topic, and then they clear out. You see, that's a sign that it's all free for all when they leave. Thank you.
Governor, in the wake of today's U.S. Supreme Court ruling on sports betting, would you support legal sports betting in Minnesota?
I think that's falls in that category. I don't know. It's simple.
Good on this topic.
Okay, Fox 9. Yep.
Did you see the report about, looks like it appears to be widespread fraud involving child care assistance funds, and what is your response and reaction to that?
Well, any evidence of fraud of any kind is deeply disturbing because it fundamentally undermines people's confidence in the efficacy of our state systems and compromises the integrity of the whole operation. I don't know the report gave fair credit to what the Department of Human Services has been doing to try to investigate and punish the fraud that's occurred. And it's not enough. We added, with the legislators' support, 8 positions last year, doubling the number of investigators. They will be able to redouble the efforts being made, but it's not something that we've been indifferent to or unconcerned about. And I think they've made some significant inroads into relations with the Somali community and other minority communities so that they can get the information necessary to prosecute those who are abusing the system, which is absolutely unacceptable and illegal and really immoral when you think that these are small children who we're taking care of and paying taxpayers' dollars to take care of, and then people are turning around and ripping that money off for their own personal profit. It's really, really disgraceful. So I appreciate the report. It's very important visibility is something that we've been aware of and doing, working against, but there's a lot more that needs to be done.
If I could ask a follow-up. Was your office ever informed that there were people within DHS that were very concerned about the magnitude of this fraud, that it was approaching $100 million a year, and that there was serious concern that some of that money, whether it's originally intended for or not, is ending up in the hands of terrorists?
I was not informed. I think that number, which is now being taken by one candidate for office as being over $100 million, is unsubstantiated. That's one person's assertion, is my understanding. So I think you have to take that with a grain of salt. But as Acting Commissioner Johnson said, there are cases that involve millions of dollars, and that kind of fraud and abuse, is something that we cannot stand for, should not stand for. But my chief of staff currently and previous chief of staff, from what I'm told, did not get any information alleging that there was that kind of volume of theft.
And as far as the concern about potential terrorism connection, have you heard anything about that?
I don't know anything about that one way or the other. I have not talked to I've talked in general with the FBI and the Homeland Security, but I don't know if they've traced that money. The report said that one FBI agent said he knew but he couldn't say. I haven't pursued that with them. I don't know where the money is going. I would guess some of it's going to help needy families, and some of it's probably being siphoned off and used for nefarious crimes. So, you know, any money that's being taken from our state system, which is a manifestation of the goodwill of Minnesotans toward those in great need, it's being ripped off and used for personal gain as well as for other purposes is just absolutely unacceptable.
Governor, if I could just ask you your thoughts again, going back to the United States Supreme Court decision this morning, which would legalize sports betting in any state or across the nation. What are your thoughts? There are some legislators who'd like to see it, including Representative Garofalo, said you'd like to see it in place in time for the Viking season. What are your thoughts about that? Is this a potential revenue maker for the state?
Well, my headline was that the Supreme Court possibly opened up. I don't know the details. If you ask me this tomorrow, I'll have an answer for you. But I just don't know the details, so I can't comment on that.
Governor, in general, though, are you against expanding gambling in Minnesota?
I'm from Minnesota, getting a share of the profits that occur from what's already going on. I don't know the expanding. Again, I'm not going to comment because I don't know what extent this expands, quote unquote. That would be concerning. But the fact that it's going on, billions of dollars, and the state of Minnesota is getting no benefit from that, I would like to correct that for sure.
Governor, another issue, the House tacked on to their bonding bill the Veterans Home funding with the stadium funds. It passed unanimously, including all the DFLers. Your thoughts about that?
Well, is Mr. Franz still here? No. I mean, he can say better than I. You know, there's a minimum amount of actual cash in the fund that needs to be there before he and other financial experts believe that it would be safe to take excess of that and use it for other purposes. And it's about $40 million. And at the end of the next biennium, the projection is it'll be up to $58 million. If the next legislature sees that there's $40 million plus in the bank and they want to use that additional money for some purpose, I think that's fiscally responsible. But to take the money based on a projection and not even account for it honestly, I think is really irresponsible. And you know, when the pull tabs were doing badly and there wasn't money going in, we got criticized for that. And now the pull tabs are doing well and there's money going in, now we're criticized for that. I mean, they're going to criticize one way or the other. But the important thing is it's a $1 billion+ operation, and it's got to be on a rock solid financial footing. And it affects the credit standing of the state of Minnesota, the state of Minneapolis, and everything else. So, I mean, it's just, and again, there's money, there's $825 million in the bonding bill. They can put the money in it's just a political gimmick to take the money from the stadium. You could put the money in the bonding bill. I'll support that. 25, 26, 32 million, whatever the different numbers are. Put it in the bonding bill. General obligation bonds. I mean, that's simple and straightforward. But you know, they want to try to contrive this issue that, you know, they're for veterans' homes, and I'm not. It's just not true. Just patently untrue.
Governor, the Senate has now joined the House in passing the bill to increase penalties on protesters who obstruct freeway traffic, light rail lines, or airport access roads. It's not clear to me where you are on that these days.
Well, I said at the time of the protests about in the aftermath of the killing of Juan Castillo, that I would support stiffer penalties for people who block interstate highways and airport access, because those are public safety issues. I have to look at the language, but from what I've seen so far, you know, that include transit, does that include every bus in the metropolitan area? There's talk that they're going to include pipelines. Well, you can just foresee what they're looking to do there if the Enbridge project goes forward and people are exercising their constitutional rights to free assembly to object to that. So I mean, I have to look and see. I think that, you know, I took what I said I could support and I broadened it, and the things that I won't support. And they also, it's also true in existing Minnesota statute, which I was going to, if we ever got into negotiations, and they never brought this to me for any kind of discussion. This is another one of these political contrivances. But Minnesota law now holds somebody criminally liable if they're engaged in a conversation with a group of people and somebody goes off and does something on their own. The people who engaged in that conversation are criminally liable. Richard Nixon did that. John Mitchell is Attorney General back in the 1960s, and it was 3 or more people talking together constituted a conspiracy. And each one of them, or others of them, were held criminally liable for whatever one often did. Talk about an attempt to stifle First Amendment rights. I mean, that's just blatant. It was revoked by the subsequent administration, so it didn't get tested constitutionally, but no doubt in my mind it's unconstitutional. And I think this would be too.
So it sounds like you're not going to sign it or you might veto it. Is that accurate?
Again, I have to read the final language before I'm going to make a comment, but yeah, I think I've outlined my concerns.
Governor, with the Minnesota Care buy-in last week when you had a press conference, there was a physician here who said that Medicaid doesn't pay enough. Minnesota Care would pay enough to keep the lights on. But if there's an expansion of Minnesota Care and therefore more people are using that with lower reimbursement rates, how does the math work out? How is that possible? Where does the funding come from?
Well, the one doctor said that, and I don't quarrel with what he said, but the rates the state reimburses for different services, human services, medical services, are always under negotiation. I mean, child care reimbursement rates or nursing home reimbursement rates, I mean, they're all in some measure of flux, and circumstances change costs. So if the doctors and healthcare providers come in and say, what you're paying on Medicaid is not sufficient to allow us to expand the program, then I mean, if I were governor, I'd respond to that. I can't speak for others, but to me that's not a reason to defeat it. It's a reason to recognize it as a work in progress. And since the people who will be buying into Minnesota Care under this proposal would pay the cost so that there's no cost to the taxpayers, then their rates would go up accordingly. So instead of saving 28% from traditional insurance plans, maybe they'll save 20%, maybe they'll save 15%, I can't say. But to try to scuttle the whole thing on that basis is, again, just camouflage.
Governor, today the Senate joined with the House in approving a bill that would essentially suspend the White Bear Lake water levels court ruling for a year. What are your thoughts on that bill?
Well, again, would need to go into detail with the DNR, but it's widespread controversy. Some other resource issues that are in the same boat. Muskies in some lakes, Mille Lacs. And the conflicts over resource use are usually the most difficult and intractable for various reasons. So, if they need another year to try to work out a better resolution, I could certainly, I wouldn't veto that. I'm not going to take a position on the bill one way or the other, but if it's a permanent disbarring, I think, that has to go through a different process. And I think the courts would have something to say about that as well.
Last question.
Governor, before we came in here today, the House and Senate leaders Republican leaders gave to us a letter in which they invited you to a 2 o'clock meeting to talk about the budget. Are you going to go to that?
No, because first of all, I got it after 12 o'clock. And secondly, as I said, they claimed I was unavailable this morning. Well, I was available. Their information's unavailable. And until we get honest accounting on the budget, and that means fiscal 18-19, fiscal 20-21, at least those two, should be 22-23 too, what the dollars are, and the language and the spreadsheets. Until we get that for every single one of those sections of that omnibus bill, I mean, there's nothing that we can resolve together, and that's their responsibility. Their responsibility is to set forth clearly and honestly, as I did months ago, my budget positions. And they've known what they've been for a couple of months, and I don't even know what theirs are with a week to go. So if they want to have we're having a breakfast tomorrow morning, a bipartisan breakfast, and we can begin discussions there, and we can continue them as warranted. But again, I want to make it very clear, without an agreement on their part on the emergency school aid funding, I'm not going to negotiate or sign a tax bill.
Okay.
These other bills, we can try to work out if they'll give us the necessary information, but not that one.
Thanks, everyone. All right, good afternoon. We are about 1 week from the end of session, and things actually progressing very nicely. We have invited the governor to visit with us here in just about 15 minutes, so we'll look forward to that meeting. Obviously, he wasn't available to meet with us this morning, but look forward to sitting down and coming up with bills that not only can pass the legislature, but he can sign. So with that, Senator Gazelka, and then we can take some questions.
Let me just say I was surprised at the governor's most recent requests, $130 million for education at this late place in what we're doing is next to impossible. If you saw what we did early in session, we all talked about a bonding bill, a tax conformity bill. As we moved into session, we talked about safe schools. We talked about doing something about opioid abuse and elder care abuse, and MNLARs, fixing MNLARs, and we even got a letter from the governor on that roughly, I'm just guessing here, but about 4 to 6 weeks ago. And so this $130 million for education with all of those things that we need to do is next to impossible. And we got it at such a late date that I don't see how that possibly can happen and do all the other things that we agreed to. Another one that we agreed to was fixing the pension problem. And so all of those things are on the table. We've all been working on those, and suddenly, if we try to do this, many of those have to come off the table. So, questions?
Are you willing to say goodbye to your tax bill then? It's pretty definitive, no school aid, no tax bill.
So I serve on the tax committee, and we all know with the federal changes that happened in November, the most significant tax changes since 1986, that we have to conform. If we don't conform, Minnesota's tax filing becomes very, very difficult. And so we all agree that that's important to do. And so if we choose not to do that, it makes it difficult for all of Minnesotans. And one of the things we did on the tax bill, the House and Senate have come to basically an agreement waiting for the governor to engage, is it does raise taxes a little bit on businesses. And we took all of the money, $140 million, and drove that towards the individuals so that individuals didn't have to pay more in taxes. And we figured out a way to do it where over 99% won't pay taxes. And so we can't then just throw all that out and try to fit this in the end. If we don't do a tax bill, that would be a shame for Minnesota.
I think obviously, in order for us to get to some agreement, we all have to sit down around the table together, and I know we're at the point in session where it's time to do that. We look forward to sitting down with the governor to talk about what his priorities are, and we know since the beginning of session, even before session, when we did our press briefing at that time, we all talked about the importance of a tax conformity bill. We know that at the federal level, folks are going to be able to do their tax returns on a postcard, and if we don't take action or the governor doesn't sign a tax bill this year, I'm not sure the Revenue Department in the state of Minnesota will even be able to prepare the documents for people to file their taxes next year. And if they do, it will likely take a document the size of a phone book. So this is a pretty important thing, and I think the governor knows that. Unfortunately, the governor's tax bill really is a non-starter with us. The governor's tax bill, as you all know, according to the tax incidence study that was prepared by his own department, the governor's tax bill raises taxes on every income level of Minnesotans. That's something that was not a priority for us. We want to make sure that Minnesotans are held harmless or see a tax reduction. And our tax reduction goes to middle-income Minnesotans from $35,000 in income on up. Most folks under $35,000 likely don't pay state taxes, so really this hits the heart of most Minnesotans and gives us the most beneficial impact, we think, for Minnesota families.
Are you willing to give up tax cuts by not giving them school?
We're going to pass a tax conformity bill that helps Minnesotans prepare their taxes next year and hopefully lets them keep a little more of their money. But ultimately, the goal of this bill is tax conformity to make it easier for Minnesotans to file their taxes. We hope that the governor will participate in that process. If he doesn't, it's going to be very difficult to get to some agreement. But we've invited him to a meeting. We've invited the governor to a meeting today at 2 o'clock. We tried to meet with him this morning. My hope is that we'll see him in a few minutes at 2 o'clock and we can start to discuss these things. As far as You know, I sent a letter on school aid, the emergency school funding that the governor's requesting. You know, he didn't talk about this before session. He didn't talk about it when session started. He has never spoken to either of us, or hasn't spoken to me about it. I don't know if he's spoken to the senator about it. Never had a conversation, and we talk quite frequently. The governor did not include it in his supplemental budget, so it looks like a political thing. I hope that it's not. I hope that he's genuine about it. But I sent a letter last week saying that if this is important, it needs to have hearings in the legislature, and it was introduced by the governor too late in the process to get the sort of overview and vetting that it will need by the legislature to become law. And he's calling it emergency funding, and in Minnesota we deal with emergency funding by having emergency special sessions. So he certainly can call a special session for us to deal with this over the interim, but we're going to work on the things that the governor has talked about and we have talked about not only before session but during session, and we hope that he will stay engaged or get engaged in that process.
Is the special session the only way to end the impasse?
No, we don't need a special session at all. You know, we certainly just want to accomplish the work that we all came here to accomplish. Number one, that's tax conformity. We do have an education bill that invests needed dollars into the safety and security of our schools and fixes other problems. We've got a lot of work into these bills, and we hope that the governor will engage in the process now so we can get to agreement. Senator?
Yeah, and so as far as do we need a special session, we do not need a special session. But if this new money that he's asking for for education, keep in mind that last year we did the 2-year budget. It was $1.3 billion of new money for education. This year we said we'd fix their pension, and I think we have come to agreement, if we can move that forward, that will be fixed. Plus we have money for safe and secure schools. And so it's not like we're not doing anything for education. We just know that other things need to be addressed as well. And like I said, we all talked about these priorities. All of the priorities that I just mentioned earlier, the governor was talking about as well, until suddenly this change at the very end. And that's why it's too much too late. We can work on this next year and get it done, or if he calls a special session, that would be something we would consider then as well.
Are you saying it's next to impossible to do the size he wants, or next to impossible to do
so it's next to impossible to do the $130 million that the governor's asking for. Keep in mind we have $329 million. $140 million of that went to the tax bill. Again, that was so Minnesotans on the individual side did not pay a tax increase. Even though we lowered their brackets a little bit, but that was so that they wouldn't get a tax increase. And so if you add that, and then you add the pensions that we need to fix, MNLARs that we need to fix, safe schools, opioid abuse, MNLARs, all of those are things that take money and cause us not to have the resources that he wants.
Mr. Leader, the governor says that the business tax breaks are disproportionate in terms of the bracket changes and also the foreign. Are you willing to perhaps back off on those a little bit so there might be some money for education?
So the question is, the governor's saying that would we back away from what he would call business tax cuts? And I want to tell you that as we look at the numbers, corporations will pay $35 million more under the agreed tax plan between the House and Senate. So it's not like we're asking them to pay less. They're paying more right now, but we wanted to use that $140 million to drive down the cost to the individual, asking businesses to pay a little bit, but we don't expect them to have another tax increase when we're already in the top 5 worst states for businesses.
I would add to that, you know, businesses in our tax plan do pay more, and it's so that middle-income Minnesotans can pay less. In the governor's tax plan, every income bracket of Minnesotans will pay more under the governor's tax plan. And as far as we're concerned, that's a non-starter. We don't think now is the time when we have a surplus like this to increase taxes on Minnesota families and ask them to pay more.
Help us understand,
where do businesses pay more under the conference, the agreed-on conference?
Yeah, through a function of the federal tax conformity, if you look at getting rid of all of the deductions and things that they are losing, and then, yes, they're getting a rate reduction, but net, they are still getting a tax increase. So businesses under the Republican tax plan will have a slight tax increase. Minnesotans will have a fairly sizable tax decrease, and a very meaningful tax decrease that will help Minnesota families.
It's an interaction between the federal and the state.
Yeah. So if we conform to the federal bill, that's where they're going to have the tax increases. We agreed to take $50 million of deemed foreign income that they would pay. The governor did not want the tax triggers, so as a good faith step, we got rid of the tax triggers. That was one of the things he said he did not want. The governor said he didn't want us to move any farther on the estate tax, so we went back to where we were last year. And so we feel like we've made good faith efforts with the governor, but we need him to engage, and the $130 million more on his request right now is just unworkable.
When is the latest you could take a vote on that bill and still have some time if there is an override potential?
Well, our plan was to work with the governor to the end. We hope to continue to do that. We hope that he comes to the table to work with us as far as both the tax bill, the bonding bill, and the omnibus spending bill. And so I don't really want to put a date on there. We can go all the way till midnight Sunday night. I would love it if we got done Friday at midnight, but I've heard that lots of people promise that, and rarely does it happen.
But what about time for override? Just to go back to Brian's question, do you need to pass it just?
It would be 3 days. From the time we pass the bill, 3 days later is what we have to have.
Is that possible? Is that a possible?
It's possible, but I don't think that's the way we really want to go. We want the governor to engage with us. That's what we're asking him to do.
Senator, on another quick issue for down the road, where does the Senate GOP caucus stand on the sports gambling now that the U.S. Supreme Court has struck down the federal law?
I don't know that we have an opinion at this point. If you're asking for a caucus position, we've not caucused it, so I can't give you that at this point.
Personally, where do you stand?
I don't want to make a comment.
Why not?
Because
Representative Garofalo had a news conference saying as soon as we can, we should make this legal in Minnesota. And we asked him, well, the Senator Zelka and some of the senators have problems with it.
Well, generally, personally, I've been opposed to expanding gambling, but we'll have to see. A couple of years ago, it went through in the tax committee. There was bipartisan support against it. We'll see where that is from now.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. I won't be late for our meeting.